Hello, and welcome to Cry Havoc Wargaming, dedicated to bringing you the uncommon. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Ron, and today we're going to be doing a review of a number of Wild West kits in MDF. So let's get started. Recently, I received a comment of one of my videos suggesting that it might be a good topic to talk about comparison of a number of MDF kits. You know, some of them are out of scale with one another. There's various quality issues. Some are very good quality, some are less so. And I thought it was actually a very good idea and thought I would give that a try. However, the more I've considered it, the more I thought I can't just do a random, here's a handful of kits all together and what I think of them. So I've decided to break it down into a series of genres. I picked genres that I have multiple kits from different companies that I thought might be popular across the board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide those into MDF kits for 28mm World War II, MDF kits for 28mm Wild West gaming, and 28mm kits for pulp or gangster gaming, sort of a 1920s, 30s, or old big city American sort of architecture. So we're going to start by doing some Wild West buildings. So let's go to the building table. So here's a series of buildings I have portraying Wild West and MDF. The brands that are represented here right now is Sarissa, Knuckle Duster, Gamecraft, and Empire of War. This building and this building here are Gamecraft. Gamecraft is one of the earliest lines to do MDF Wild West buildings. The nice thing about these buildings today is price. These are probably the least expensive of any of the kits we're going to be talking about. They come unpainted. The Wild West buildings were not painted properly. Paint was expensive in the period. Typically when you see a building in the period, it is only painted, this is a bad example. This is a better one. It'll only be painted in the front, as you see here. The side will be left bare wood, and MDF is really good for doing bare wood. Most of my buildings that I've painted myself, I've used just a coat or two of those inexpensive craft paints that you can get at Michael's or any sewing shops. You know the ones I mean. They're like $1.79 in a bottle. MDF really sucks up the paint, and if you really wanted to cover well, it would take a lot of that paint. But you don't want it to cover well. You want it to look like a watered down, thin paint that the frontiersmen were making go farther by watering down. So that's really the look it should have. So that's a real advantage of MDF and of these particular buildings. The disadvantage is they have no names on them. You can either freehand your company names on, which can look good, particularly if you're talented at doing that. I've used model railroading decals. I'm not sure how pleased I am with that. For one thing, I couldn't find any in S or O scale, which would be more proper for this scale of game. Mine are all HO, so they're kind of dinky for the buildings. I think my decals were probably old, which didn't help. They wouldn't enter into the detail the way I would have preferred, because these should be painted on. Now Gamecraft does do a series of separate signs you can buy. I didn't go that route the first time because they were all funny names. They were all based on Blazing Saddles. He has two sets now. But what is more common in the period is to actually have the name painted right onto the building rather than painted onto a sign added. So now the good things, like I said, of these buildings is money. The bad things, the line is, like I said, about 10 years old. There's been very little change in those buildings since that time, and there's been quite a bit of change in the Wild West gaming world. For instance, these buildings do not have interiors. The roofs are glued on, and they're all solid structures. And in most cowboy games nowadays, you're going to want to be able to go into the buildings. It's hard to backdate buildings like mine, but now there's kits you can buy from him that will allow you to make the roofs removable, and floors you can buy to put inside them. So that's a step towards making them have an interior. Another aspect of challenge with them is they're a little small. I'm going to show you, this is a Knuckle Duster figure. I'm going to do this because the Knuckle Duster figures are a little taller than some of the older figures. As the figures have gotten larger, most of the buildings have gotten a little larger. Again, Gamecraft has addressed that. So you can buy now risers the sort of foundations you can put under the building, and improves the window or the door size to fit them with the figures, but it'll make the building look more fitting next to other buildings that may be larger. Pros of Gamecraft is a bunch of basic designs, great if you're trying to fill a big 6x4 board, and they're inexpensive. The negatives are mostly, like I say, they do not have interiors. You can kind of address that by adding to them, but then you're losing some of the financial aspect of the lesser priced building. So, you know, that's up to you and what you have in mind. I wasn't even going to talk about this building originally, because unfortunately it is Flags of War. And Flags of War, while they're still around making their beautiful flags, they no longer make buildings. And they had a beautiful line of MDF buildings. So I'm really unhappy that they've gone. I wish that somebody would pick that line up, and as far as I can tell, nobody has. But this over here, this sheriff's office, is an example, one of their less expensive buildings. Originally, this building came with an optional choice of an upgraded roof. I was planning to buy that, but I was going to buy it later, and by the time I went to get it, the line had disappeared. So my roof is made from cardstock roofing materials, probably from war bases in England. But a number of companies that do MDF. War Bases does it. Charlie Foxtrot Game does them. I need to talk to Phalanx. I don't know why he doesn't do them, and a real advantage to have somebody in America doing them. But again, this building has more of an interior. The walls are still unfinished. In fact, the rear door isn't even represented on the inside. But it has jail cells and some room for interior. It has a raised floor. This is also missing an exterior wall here. It had these pieces that would go on the outside, because this is supposed to be adobe. I haven't finished painting it yet, but it's supposed to be adobe, but it would also help hide those lines. And that piece was missing from my kit. I mean, I might have been able to get it still from Flags of War. The company's still around, like I say, but I haven't even asked because they're gone. Beautiful kits. If you can find any around anywhere, I would certainly recommend them. But they were a little expensive, and they've pretty much disappeared. I mean, they don't even make them anymore. Next, I'm going to go to Sarissa. I have quite a lot of Sarissa. I only have one thing on the table, and that is this huge bank just here. So the problem with Sarissa, as an MDF manufacturer, they do some really nice designs in my opinion. Most of their Wild West buildings seem a little fantasy driven. I don't know what their inspirations were, and they do some very strange things. They have a lot of buildings where the building slides all the way up to the false front, which really isn't how false fronts were done. So not really sure why they did that. This building actually comes from their south of the border line, which I think is in many ways one of the better of their line. It's definitely the best of their Wild West lines. But the problem I have with Sarissa is you really have to know what you're looking at. This isn't a good example. I don't think it's as much a problem with the Wild West, but as I did mention, this is their south of the border line, and I have a beautiful cantina or little adobe from that line that is out of scale with this building. That's the problem with Sarissa, is their scale doesn't remain consistent from model to model to model. They do really good work. I really like a lot of their models, but you don't really ever know whether you're going to get, well, whether it's going to be 25, 28, or 32 millimeter you're building, and then the newer stuff. But this building I like a lot. It is huge. It's a little big on my table compared to my other buildings. The doors are done in a way that they're sort of oversized, but it would make sense. So even with the larger knuckle duster figures, it doesn't look wrong, but it certainly looks fine with a smaller Wargames Foundry figure. The interior is completely a full interior. Right now I haven't painted any of it. In fact, none of these walls are glued in. It has a desk for the tellers. There's an area dividing off the office and the room for the safe from the rest of the bank. I mean, if you're going to do a bank robbery scenario, then you need a bank, and you need a bank that you can actually have a lot of activity inside, and this is a perfect structure for that. In fact, I feel like in this game, you really, for Wild West gaming, if you're not going to have interiors, you definitely need an interior in a sheriff's office, in your bank, and in a saloon, because you're going to have fights in those buildings. I think it's better to have interiors for all of your buildings, because otherwise then you're limiting what buildings people can or cannot go into. And they're more likely, I think, in Wild West games to go into buildings than some other games. As we've got more and more to smaller tables and more skirmish games, the need for interiors increases. So the next buildings I'm going to talk about are these two here. These are Empires of War. I do like Empire of War's buildings, and I have a few for World War II that I'm going to be talking about in a later video. But these two are for their Wild West line. If I had to do this over again, I think I bought these both through eBay. But if you buy them directly through Empires of War, you have the option of what colors to get them in or to get them unpainted at all. If I did this again, I would go with unpainted for the same reason I mentioned earlier. I don't think these look bad, the painting on these, but it would look better if it was that same sort of not entirely painted. This has an interior. The bar is a knuckle duster bar. Another great thing about this period, Knuckle Duster does an awful lot of furniture for your barber shop, for general stores, for the sheriff's office, and clearly for the saloon. So this has an interior. Again, you got to have a useful interior in your saloon. And it's a pretty good size, and I think this is a nice building. And again, as I said, all pre-painted. Only problem I have really with Empire right now, there's little detail things. On the rastering of the boards, they made them way too long. And of course, in America right now, it is pricey to import buildings or anything from England. So that's a problem with these buildings. I think their prices are reasonable, but when you're looking at the import costs, it starts getting higher. This is my barber shop. Again, I think it's a really nice looking building. I really like what they did with some of the architectural details on it, but it is also tiny. This one's also, the walls are pre-painted inside as well, so they're actually kind of white in there, which makes it look nicer looking and ready to go onto a table really quickly. Not a lot of interior. Of course, it is only a barber shop. You don't need a whole lot in there. And there is a set of furniture for barbershops made by Knuckle Duster Games. This brings us to the last building I'm going to show you here today, which is the only building I have by Knuckle Duster right now. I intend to improve on that. Knuckle Duster actually, in my opinion, makes probably the best buildings for this period. And the reason I would say that mostly is going to be because of a detail that they take that nobody else seems to right now. And that is, their MDF products are a mixture of MDF and soft metal castings. So all the windows are not only external, as they would be even on this Gamecraft building, but the interior sills are also present. The windows are all two-piece models that fit together. I'm missing a couple pieces on this one, so it's not fully assembled. What a great model this is, and what a useful thing for a game. I have 3 model livery stables, but this is the only one I have that has an interior. So with this one here, you have the hay loft, you have carriage stalls here, you have horse stalls on the end. There's a set, I don't have it yet, but there's a set of extra details that come with hay bales and some loose hay and tack that you can put around to really help make it look more real. What a great model, what a great model. And all of their models are designed with play in mind. So there's usually room to move things around inside. I believe all of them, they sort of have 2 lines. They have less expensive line and they have their upper more expensive lines, but I think they all come with these soft metal castings for the windows and things. Only thing I don't like about this kit, and mine's a bad example because this is actually their prototype. A lot of this, their MDF buildings and the castings were designed by a good friend of mine and a member of my local club. And so this was actually the prototype for their livery stable. And so this one has livery actually burned into the original wood. So I could just paint it. That gives you an area to paint it, helps you paint a good looking sign very easily, instead of having a glued on, not as typical looking sign. I think this looks much better. I wish they had continued with that. But if you were to buy this kit today, you're going to have the sign that hangs from it. That's not horrible. And if you're any good at freehand painting signs, or if you can make your own decals, if you have a printer capability to do that, which is not that hard in the modern world. White's a little more difficult. But I noticed watching Open Range the other day that their livery is in, painting is in red. There's zillions of Old West style fonts that you can get often for free onto your computer that will allow you to make whatever signs you want. So you could leave that separate MDF sign off and just put what you want on it. Now, there's a couple companies I do not have represented here that I wanted to talk about. One of the most popular makers right now for MDF Wild West Terrain is probably Foreground, who of course is a well-known company for making pre-painted MDF buildings. I have some issues with the Foreground. Mostly it's the price. Again, they're expensive kits, and now with shipping from England, even more expensive. And then you're going to end up with that painting that looks and more modern, professionally painted than these buildings should actually look like. So I'm not a big fan of that. They do all have workable doors and interiors. That's all brilliant. They don't have signs on them as far as I can tell, which makes them very, very reusable. You can either never put signs on them and just assign them what you want them to be for your game, or you can decide what you want when you're building your town. But they do a line of tent buildings. Most of these boom towns were originally false fronts with tent structures behind them when they started, particularly where I'm from, out in California. In the gold rush country, that was really, really common. And Foreground does a number of those buildings. I'm definitely going to get one of those eventually, and I think those are pretty interesting. I'm glad somebody's reproducing that concept. They also do a really nice looking train. I haven't seen it in person, but the model, from what I've seen of it, is just absolutely stunning. And I don't know how it's constructed. It doesn't look like MDF, so it may be a combination of MDF and resin, or it is a very clever MDF model. So I wish I had one of those to show you. I'm not a big enough fan that I've purchased any, but I don't think there's anything wrong with those. What I meant to bring was a barn. I have a company I do a lot of business with that I don't have represented here, except I think this is Charlie Foxtrot. I think this is actually meant to be a World War II outbuilding. But I have a couple of outbuildings from Charlie Foxtrot. There are outhouses that you can purchase from Charlie Foxtrot does them. I think War Bases does them. I think Gamecraft does them. Those are easily got. But what War Bases does, they have a basic line of buildings that have very little detail to them that you can add to yourself. I have one of their barns, which I sided in a similar fashion to the roof I did here with paper siding material. There's also a lot of MDF products available on eBay. Those are tricky. I'd be very careful when looking at some of those. Again, the scale's all over the place. Some of them are well made and well thought out. Some of them are not, and you can easily get burned on some of these little companies on eBay. That gives you an idea of what some of the buildings are out there, how well they play together, what you might expect if you were to invest in some of them. And I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions about any of the buildings I mentioned, or you'd like to add some to the list that you like, or talk about your own opinions regarding some of these lines that you may have, please do that in the comments down below. If you have any ideas for further content you'd like to see us produce and discuss here on Cry Havoc Wargaming, we look for that in the comments down below. In fact, the whole idea of discussing these MDF kits and comparing some MDF kits came from a suggestion through the comments down below. If you have found this content useful, or you have enjoyed the video, I hope that you will hit like. And if you'd like to receive notifications to receive further videos discussing how you might spend your time or money in the wargaming hobby, please hit subscribe. Until next time, cheers.